To understand how a coach's focus on changing habits could remake a team, it's necessary to look outside the world of sports. Way outside, to a dingy basement on the Lower East Side of New York City, in 1934, where one of the largest and most successful attempts at wide-scale habit change was born. Sitting in the basement was a 39-year-old alcoholic named Bill Wilson. Years earlier, Wilson had taken his first drink during officers' training camp in New Bedford, Massachusetts, where he was learning to fire machine guns before getting shipped to France and World War I. Prominent families who lived near the base often invited officers to dinner, and one Sunday night, Wilson attended a party where he was served rarebit and beer. He was 22 years old and had never had alcohol before. The only polite thing, it seemed, was to drink the glass served to him. A few weeks later, Wilson was invited to another elegant affair. Men were in tuxedos, women were flirting. A butler came by and put a Bronx cocktail, a combination of gin, dry and sweet Vermouth, and orange juice, into Wilson's hand. He took a sip and felt, he later said, as if he had found the exiler of life. By the mid-1930s, back from Europe, his marriage falling apart and a fortune from selling stocks vaporized, Wilson was consuming 3 bottles of booze a day. On a cold November afternoon, while he was sitting in the gloom, an old drinking buddy called. Wilson invited him over and mixed a pitcher of pineapple juice and gin. He poured his friend a glass. His friend handed it back. He had been sober for 2 months, he said. Wilson was astonished. He started describing his own struggles with alcohol, including the fight he had gotten into at a country club that had cost him his job. He had tried to quit, he said, but couldn't manage it. He had been to detox and had taken pills. He had made promises to his wife and joined abstinence group. None of it worked. How, Wilson asks, had his friend done it? I got religion, the friend said. He talked about hell and temptation, sin and the devil. Realize you are licked, admit it, and get willing to turn your life over to God. Wilson thought the guy was nuts. Last summer, an alcoholic crackpot. Now I suspected a little cracked about religion, he later wrote. When his friend left, Wilson polished off the booze and went to bed. A month later, in December 1934, Wilson checked into the Charles P. Towns Hospital for Drug and Alcohol Addictions, an upscale Manhattan detox center. A physician started hourly infusions of a hallucinogenic drug called belladonna, then in vogue for the treatment of alcoholism. Wilson floated in and out of consciousness on a bed in a small room. Then, in an episode that has been described at millions of meetings and cafeterias, union halls, and church basements, Wilson began writhing in agony. For days, he hallucinated. The withdrawal pains made it feel as if insects were crawling across his skin. He was so nauseous he could hardly move. But the pain was too intense to stay still. If there is a God, let him show himself, Wilson yelled to his empty room. I am ready to do anything, anything. At that moment, he later wrote, a white light filled his room. The pain ceased, and he felt as if he were on a mountaintop, and that a wind not of air but of spirit was blowing. And then it burst upon me that I was a free man. Slowly the ecstasy subsided. I lay on the bed, but now for a time I was in another world, a new world of consciousness. Bill Wilson would never have another drink. For the next 36 years, until he died of emphysema in 1971, he would devote himself to founding, building, and spreading Alcoholics Anonymous until it became the largest, most well-known, and successful habit-changing organization in the world. An estimated 1 million people seek help from AA each year, and as many as 10 million alcoholics may have achieved sobriety through the group. AA doesn't work for everyone. Success rates are difficult to measure because of participants' anonymity, but millions credit the program with saving their lives. AA's foundational credo, the famous 12 steps, have become cultural lodestones incorporated into treatment programs for overeating, gambling, debt, sex, drugs, hoarding, self-mutilation, smoking, video game addictions, emotional dependency, and dozens of other destructive behaviors. The group's techniques offer, in many respects, one of the most powerful formulas for changing. All of which is somewhat unexpected because AA has almost no grounding in science or most accepted therapeutic methods. Alcoholism, of course, is more than habit. It's a physical addiction with psychological and perhaps genetic roots. What's interesting about AA, however, is that the program doesn't directly attack many of the psychiatric or biochemical issues that researchers say are often at the core of why alcoholics drink. In fact, AA's methods seem to sidestep scientific and medical findings altogether, as well as the types of intervention many psychiatrists say alcoholics really need. What AA provides instead is a method for attacking the habits that surround alcohol use. AA, in a sense, is a giant machine for changing habit loops, and though the habits associated with alcoholism are extreme, the lessons AA provides demonstrate how almost any habit, even the most obstinate, can be changed. Bill Wilson didn't read academic journals or consult many doctors before founding AA. A few years after he achieved sobriety, he wrote the now famous 12 Steps in a rush one night while sitting in bed. He chose the number 12 because there were 12 apostles, and some aspects of the program are not just unscientific, they can seem downright strange. Take, for instance, AA's insistence that alcoholics attend 90 meetings in 90 days, a stretch of time it appears chosen at random, or the program's intense focus on spirituality as articulated in Step 3, which says that alcoholics can achieve sobriety by making a decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God as we understand Him. 7 of the 12 steps mention God or spirituality, which seems odd for a program founded by a one-time agnostic who, throughout his life, was openly hostile towards organized religion. AA's meetings don't have a prescribed schedule or curriculum. Rather, they usually begin with a member telling his or her story, after which other people can chime in. There are no professionals who guide conversations and few rules about how meetings are supposed to function. In the past 5 decades, as almost every aspect of psychiatry and addiction research has been revolutionized by discoveries in behavioral sciences, pharmacology, and our understanding of the brain, AA has remained frozen in time. Because of the program's lack of rigor, academics and researchers have often criticized it. AA's emphasis on spirituality, some claimed, made it more like a cult than a treatment. In the past 15 years, however, a re-evaluation has begun. Researchers now say the program's methods offer valuable lessons. Faculty at Harvard, Yale, the University of Chicago, the University of New Mexico, and dozens of other research centers have found a kind of science within AA that is similar to the one Tony Dungy used on the football field. Their findings endorse the golden rule of habit change. AA succeeds because it helps alcoholics use the same cues and get the same reward, but it shifts the routine. Researchers say that AA works because the program forces people to identify the cues and rewards that encourage their alcoholic habits and then helps them find new behaviors. When Claude Hopkins was selling Pepsodent, he found a way to create a new habit by triggering a new craving. But to change an old habit, you must address an old craving. You have to keep the same cues and rewards as before and feed the craving by inserting a new routine. Take steps 4. To make a searching and fearless inventory of ourselves, and 5. To admit to God, to ourselves, and to another human being the exact nature of our wrongs. It's not obvious from the way they are written, but to complete those steps, someone has to create a list of all the triggers for their alcoholic urges, said J. Scott Tonigan, a researcher at the University of New Mexico who has studied AA for more than a decade. When you make a self-inventory, you're figuring out all the things that make you drink, and admitting to someone else all the bad things you've done is a pretty good way of figuring out the moments where everything spiraled out of control. Then, AA asks alcoholics to search for the rewards they get from alcohol. What cravings, the program asks, are driving your habit loop? Often, intoxication itself doesn't make the list. Alcoholics crave a drink because it offers escape, relaxation, companionship, the blunting of anxieties, and an opportunity for emotional release. They might crave a cocktail to forget their worries, but they don't necessarily crave feeling drunk. The physical effects of alcohol are often one of the least rewarding parts of drinking for addicts. There is a hedonistic element to alcohol, said Ulf Müller, a German neurologist who has studied brain activity among alcoholics. But people also use alcohol because they want to forget something or to satisfy other cravings, and these relief cravings occur in totally different parts of the brain than the craving for physical pleasure. In order to offer alcoholics the same rewards they get at a bar, AA has built a system of meetings and companionship the sponsor each member works with that strives to offer as much escape, distraction, and catharsis as a Friday night bender. If someone needs relief, they can get it from talking to their sponsor or attending a group gathering rather than toasting a drinking buddy. AA forces you to create new routines for what to do each night instead of drinking, said Tonigan. You can relax and talk to your anxieties at the meetings. The triggers and payoffs stay the same, it's just the behavior that changes. Keep the cue, provide the same reward, insert a new routine. One particularly dramatic demonstration of how alcoholics' cues and rewards can be transferred to new routines occurred in 2007 when Müller, the German neurologist, and his colleagues at the University of Magdeburg implanted small electrical devices inside the brain of 5 alcoholics who had repeatedly tried to give up booze. The alcoholics in the study had each spent at least 6 months in rehab without success. One of them had been through detox more than 60 times. The devices implanted in the men's heads were positioned inside their basal ganglia, the same part of the brain where the MIT researchers found the habit loop, and emitted an electrical charge that interrupted the neurological reward that triggers habitual cravings. After the men recovered from the operations, they were exposed to cues that had once triggered alcoholic urges, such as photos of beer or trips to a bar. Normally, it would have been impossible for them to resist a drink, but the devices inside their brains overrode each man's neurological cravings. They didn't touch a drop. One of them told me the craving disappeared as soon as we turned the electricity on, Müller said. Then we turned it off and the craving came back immediately. Eradicating the alcoholic's neurological cravings, however, wasn't enough to stop their drinking habits. 4 of them relapsed soon after the surgery, usually after a stressful event. They picked up a bottle because that's how they automatically dealt with anxiety. However, once they learned alternate routines for dealing with stress, the drinking stopped for good. One patient, for instance, attended AA meetings, others went to therapy. And once they incorporated those new routines for coping with stress and anxiety into their lives, the successes were dramatic. The man who had gone to detox 60 times never had another drink. 2 other patients had started drinking at 12, were alcoholics by 18, drank every day, and now have been sober for 4 years. Notice how closely they studied cues to the golden rule of habit change. Even when alcoholics' brains were changed through surgery, it wasn't enough. The old cues and cravings for rewards were still there, waiting to bounce. The alcoholics only permanently changed once they learned new routines that drew on the old triggers and provided a familiar relief. Some brains are so addicted to alcohol that only surgery can stop it, said Müller. But those people also need new ways for dealing with life. AA provides a similar though less invasive system for inserting new routines into old habit loops. As scientists have begun understanding how AA works, they have started applying the program's methods to other habits such as 2-year-old tantrums, sex addictions, and even minor behavioral tics. As AA's methods have spread, they have been refined into therapies that can be used to disrupt almost any pattern. In the summer of 2006, a 24-year-old graduate student named Mandy walked into the counseling center at Mississippi State University. For most of her life, Mandy had bitten her nails, gnawing them until they bled. Lots of people bite their nails for chronic nail biters, however, it's a problem of a different scale. Mandy would often bite until her nails pulled away from the skin underneath. Her fingertips were covered with tiny scabs. The end of her fingers had become blunted without nails to protect them, and sometimes they tingled or itched, a sign of nerve injury. The biting habit had damaged her social life. She was so embarrassed around her friends that she kept her hands in her pockets and on dates would become preoccupied with balling her fingers into fists. She had tried to stop by painting her nails with fall-tasting polishes or promising herself starting right now that she would muster the willpower to quit. But as soon as she began doing homework or watching television, her fingers ended up in her mouth. The counseling center referred Mandy to a doctoral psychology student who was studying a treatment known as habit reversal training. The psychologist was well acquainted with the golden rule of habit change. He knew that changing Mandy's nail-biting habit required inserting a new routine into her life. "What do you feel right before you bring your hand up to your mouth to bite your nails?" he asked her. "There's a little bit of tension in my fingers," Mandy said. "It hurts a little bit here at the edge of the nail. Sometimes I'll run my thumb along looking for hangnails, and when I feel something catch, I'll bring it up to my mouth. Then I'll go finger by finger biting all the rough edges. Once I start, it feels like I have to do all of them." Asking patients to describe what triggers their habitual behavior is called awareness training, and like AA's insistence on forcing alcoholics to recognize their cues, is the first step in habit reversal training. The tension that Mandy felt in her nails cued her nail-biting habit. "Most people's habits have occurred for so long they don't pay attention to what causes it anymore," said Brad Dufresne, who treated Mandy. "I've had stutterers come in and I'll ask them which words or situations trigger their stuttering, and they won't know because they stopped noticing so long ago." Next, the therapist asked Mandy to describe why she bit her nails. At first, she had trouble coming up with reasons. As they talked, though, it became clear that she bit when she was bored. The therapist put her in some typical situations such as watching television and doing homework, and she started nibbling. When she had worked through all of her nails, she felt a brief sense of completeness, he said. That was the habit's reward, a physical stimulation she had come to crave. Mandy's habit loop. At the end of their first session, the therapist sent Mandy home with an assignment. Carry around an index card, and each time you feel the cue, a tension in your fingertips, make a check mark on the card. She came back a week later with 28 checks. She was by that point acutely aware of the sensations that preceded her habit. She knew how many times it occurred during class or while watching television. Then, the therapist taught Mandy what is known as competing response. Whenever she felt that tension in her fingertips, he told her she should immediately put her hands in her pockets or under her legs, or grip a pencil or something else that made it impossible to put her fingers in her mouth. Then Mandy was to search for something that would provide a quick physical stimulation, such as rubbing her arm or rapping her knuckles on a desk, anything that would produce a physical response. The cues and rewards stayed the same, only the routines changed. Mandy's new habit loop. They practiced in the therapist's office for about 30 minutes, and Mandy was sent home with a new assignment. Continue with the index card, but make a check when you feel the tension in your fingertips and a hash mark when you successfully override the habit. A week later, Mandy had bitten her nails only 3 times and had used the competing response 7 times. She rewarded herself with a manicure but kept using the note cards. After a month, the nail biting habit was gone. The competing routines had become automatic. One habit had replaced another. It seems ridiculously simple, but once you're aware of how your habit works, once you recognize the cues and rewards, you're halfway to changing it. Nathan Azrin, one of the developers of habit reversal training, told me, "It seems like it should be more complex. The truth is, the brain can be reprogrammed, you just have to be deliberate about it." Today, habit reversal therapy is used to treat verbal and physical tics, depression, smoking, gambling problems, anxiety, bedwetting, procrastination, obsessive compulsive disorders, and other behavioral problems. And its techniques lay bare one of the fundamental principles of habits. Often, we don't really understand the cravings driving our habits until we look for them. Mandy never realized that a craving for physical stimulation was causing her nail biting. But once she dissected the habit, it became easy to find a new routine that provided the same reward. See, you want to stop snacking at work. Is the reward you're seeking to satisfy your hunger, or is it to interrupt boredom? If you snack for a brief release, you can easily find another routine, such as taking a quick walk or giving yourself 3 minutes on the internet, that provides the same interruption without adding to your waistline. If you want to stop smoking, ask yourself, do you do it because you love nicotine, or because it provides a burst of stimulation, a structure to your day, a way to socialize? If you smoke because you need stimulation, studies indicate that some caffeine in the afternoon can increase the odds you'll quit. More than 3,000 studies of former smokers have found that identifying the cues and rewards they associate with cigarettes and then choosing new routines that provide similar payoffs, a piece of nicotine, a quick series of push-ups, or simply taking a few minutes to stretch and relax makes it more likely they'll quit. If you identify the cues and rewards, you can change the routine. At least most of the time. For some habits, however, there's one other ingredient that's necessary: belief.